Bring your little mistake over here, Delaney. I want everyone to see what real baggage looks like before we cut the cake. My sister, Sloane, tapped her crystal champagne flute with a silver fork. The delicate ringing sound cut through the soft jazz playing in the background of her lavish baby shower. She stood by the gift table, glowing in a pale pink maternity dress, surrounded by towers of wrapped boxes and floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. There were 40 guests in that room. Her wealthy friends, her husband's corporate partners, and our family. She placed her hand on a velvet rope that separated the gift display from the rest of the parlor, pulling it back like a magician about to reveal a grand illusion. Sitting right in the center of the table, surrounded by silver rattles and cashmere baby blankets, was a framed photograph. I squinted. It was the school portrait of my 9-year-old son, Callum. The one I had sent to my mother 3 days ago because she claimed she was putting together a family collage. Right below his smiling face, printed on a bright neon tag in bold, undeniable letters, was one word: Unwanted. The room erupted into laughter. It was not a nervous, hesitant chuckle. It was the loud, arrogant laughter of people who felt safe mocking a child because the host had given them permission. My stomach dropped so fast I felt physically sick. I looked at my mother, Corinne. She was standing near the fireplace, holding her drink. She did not look horrified. She looked validated. She took a slow sip of her mimosa, locked eyes with me, and said loudly enough for the front row of guests to hear, "Well, some mistakes cost you. It is a harsh lesson, but a necessary one." The blood roared in my ears. I felt Callum's small hand tighten around mine. My beautiful, quiet, observant 9-year-old boy. He had not done anything to these people. He had just existed. I looked over at my father, Thaddeus. He was standing near the catering spread, intensely focused on slicing a piece of brie cheese. He kept his head down. He heard the laughter. He heard the insult. He chose the cheese. He always chose to look away. I was paralyzed by a rage so deep it felt cold. A piece of me wanted to scream, to flip the table, to shatter every crystal glass in that room. But before I could move, before I could drag my son out of that toxic house, Callum let go of my hand. He did not cry. His face was entirely still. He walked forward, his small shoes making soft thuds against the hardwood floor. He bypassed Sloane, who was still wearing a smug, theatrical smile. He stood directly in front of the table, looking at the neon tag, and then he turned to face the 40 guests. "My dad's name was Captain Declan Whitaker," Callum said. His voice did not shake. It was clear, carrying across the sudden hush of the parlor. He died saving 6 people from a burning building. He has a medal for bravery. You have a neon sticker. The laughter died instantly. It did not fade, it was severed. Sloane's smile vanished, her hand dropping awkwardly to her side. A woman in the back row gasped. My mother's face went rigid, the mimosa glass frozen halfway to her mouth. The whole room went dead silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the ice melting in the drinks. Callum did not wait for an apology. He turned around, walked back to me, and took my hand again. "I am ready to go home now, Mom," he said quietly. I did not say a word to my sister. I did not look at my mother. I held my son's hand, turned my back on the 40 guests, and walked out the front door. The air outside was crisp, cutting into my lungs as we walked down the long driveway. The gravel crunched under our feet, the only sound in the suffocating quiet of the afternoon. My hands were shaking so violently that I struggled to unlock the car door. Once we were inside, I gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the sprawling lawn of my parents' estate. "Are you okay, buddy?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I am fine," Callum said, staring out his window. "They are just mean people. Dad would not have liked them. He was 9. He was 9 years old, and he had more dignity in his little finger than that entire house combined." I started the engine, pulling away from the curb without looking back. For years, I had swallowed their passive-aggressive comments. I had ignored the slights, the excluded invitations, the subtle ways they made sure I knew I was less than Sloane. I had taken it because I thought that was what you did with family. You endured. But as I drove back toward the city, the cold rage in my chest began to harden into something else. Something sharp and precise. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They thought they had humiliated us and won. They thought I would just retreat to my small apartment and cry. When the door closed behind me today, they thought they had chased me away. They did not know that the sound of that slamming door was the gavel dropping on a sentence I had been silently preparing for 21 months. I am a director of compliance and fraud investigation for a mid-sized logistics firm in Boston. I spend my days tracking missing decimal points, uncovering shell companies, and proving that liars leave paper trails. I ruin corporate thieves for a living. And my mother, the woman who just smiled while her grandson was called garbage, had left a trail so wide and so arrogant, it was almost insulting. They thought they knew me. They thought I was the quiet, invisible sister. They were about to find out exactly what I did in the dark. To understand how a family gets to a point where they put a neon tag on a child, you have to understand the architecture of our house. Not the physical walls, but the invisible lines drawn on the floor from the day I was born. I grew up in an affluent suburb of Boston, in a house that always smelled of fresh lilies and furniture polish. There were 2 daughters, but if you walked through our living room, you would assume I was a distant cousin who visited occasionally. The mahogany piano was covered in framed photographs. There was Sloane at her ballet recital, Sloane winning the debate tournament, Sloane at her high school graduation, Sloane posing on a beach in a designer swimsuit. There were exactly 2 pictures of me. One was a blurry group shot from a middle school science fair where I was standing in the back row. The other was my college graduation photo, tucked behind a massive silver frame of Sloane's new golden retriever. My mother, Corinne, was a former human resources executive. She treated parenting like corporate management, and Sloane was her star employee. Sloane was the golden child. She was loud, demanding, and possessed a natural ability to make everyone in the room look at her. I was the invisible child. I was the one who did my own laundry at 10 years old, cooked my own dinners when they went out to celebrate Sloane's minor achievements, and forged my own path because no one was looking my way anyway. If I brought home a perfect report card, my mother would nod, not looking up from her iPad, and say, "That is nice, Delaney. But do not become one of those boring math girls. Nobody likes a human calculator." When Sloane barely passed her communications classes, my parents bought her a vintage convertible to boost her morale during a stressful academic period. The favoritism was not just about money or pictures. It was deeply rooted in their perception of our worth. Sloane was fragile and needed to be protected and elevated. I was capable, which meant I could be neglected. The most defining moment of our dynamic happened when I was a senior in high school. I had spent 3 months researching and writing a 40-page essay for a prestigious national history competition. The prize was a significant college scholarship. I poured my soul into it, staying up until 3 in the morning, cross-referencing historical archives. I printed it out and left it on the kitchen island to pack in my binder the next morning. When I woke up, the essay was gone. I panicked. I searched the entire house. When I finally walked into the living room, I found Sloane sitting on the sofa, calmly typing on her laptop. Next to her was my printed essay. She had crossed out my name and was retyping the headers to fit a requirement for a summer journalism program she wanted to attend. "What are you doing?" I had demanded, reaching for my papers. Sloane slapped my hand away. "Relax, Delaney. I am just borrowing your structure. You have too many boring facts in here anyway. I am making it punchy. You are stealing my work. I need to submit that today." My mother walked into the room, holding a cup of coffee. I turned to her, desperate, expecting her to finally enforce a boundary. "Mom, she is copying my entire scholarship essay." Corinne took a slow sip of her coffee, looked at the papers, and then looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Delaney. Your sister needs a strong portfolio to get into that PR program. You are good at school, you will just write another one. Or figure something else out. You are always fine. Do not be selfish when your sister is under so much pressure." I stared at her, the injustice burning my throat. "I cannot just write another one in 2 hours. It is stealing." I said, "Drop it," Corinne snapped, her voice turning icy. "Your sister needs this more than you do. End of discussion." My father, Thaddeus, was reading the newspaper at the dining table. He slowly raised the paper higher, hiding his face, refusing to intervene. That was the day I stopped asking them for anything. That was the day I realized my family was not a safety net, they were a hazard. I did not go to the journalism program. I did not get the scholarship. I took out student loans, worked 3 part-time jobs, and put myself through a grueling accounting program. I became a certified public accountant, and then I kept going. I earned my credentials as a certified fraud examiner. I wanted to understand how people lied. I wanted to learn how to track the hidden things, the stolen things, the things people like my mother and sister thought they could bury under a smile and a dismissive wave of the hand. While I was building a career out of exposing truth, Sloane was building a career out of spinning lies. She started a non-profit public relations firm, using a massive seed loan from our parents. Her firm supposedly helped charities gain visibility, but in reality, it was a vanity project designed to get Sloane invited to elite galas and featured in local magazines. She posted daily about toxic energy, healing journeys, and living your truth, weaponizing therapy speak to manipulate everyone around her. I kept my distance. I showed up for the mandatory holidays, ate the dry turkey, bought the obligatory gifts, and went back to my quiet life. I thought I had built a fortress strong enough to keep their toxicity out. I was wrong. Because when you are the invisible child, they do not just ignore you. They wait until you build something beautiful, and then they try to burn it down. I had built something beautiful. His name was Declan. And the moment he entered my life, the countdown to the ultimate betrayal began. I just did not know it yet. I had survived their emotional neglect, but I was vastly unprepared for their financial cruelty. I always thought my mother's worst crime was loving my sister more than me. I had no idea she was capable of looking at a grieving widow and a fatherless infant and seeing nothing but an open vault. I met Declan at a coffee shop near the financial district. I had dropped a stack of audit files, and he knelt down to help me pick them up. He was wearing a faded Boston Fire Department t-shirt, his hands rough and scarred, his smile so genuine it knocked the wind out of me. Declan was a fire captain for Engine Company 42. He was everything my family was not. He was honest, grounded, and fiercely protective. When he looked at me, he did not see someone who was useful or someone who was in the way. He just saw me. Falling in love with him was the easiest thing I ever did. We dated for 2 years. His family, Alistair and Blythe, welcomed me with open arms. They were loud, warm, working-class people who hosted Sunday dinners with mountains of pasta and loud laughter. For the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be part of a real family. When Declan proposed, he did it on the roof of his fire station, surrounded by his crew. I said yes before he even finished asking. We were planning a small, intimate wedding for the fall. We had already picked out the rings. We were building a life. Then came the fire. It was a Tuesday in November. A massive industrial blaze in a warehouse district that had illegally converted the upper floors into residential lofts. The alarms kept ringing. 3 alarms. 4 alarms. Declan's unit was the first on the scene. The roof was unstable, the smoke toxic. People were trapped on the 3rd floor. Declan went in. He carried a young woman out. He went back in. He carried an elderly man out. He went back in a 3rd time because he heard a child crying. He found a group of 4 terrified teenagers huddled in a bathroom. He got all of them out. Every single one. He pushed the last teenager out onto the aerial ladder, turned back to check the hallway, and the floor gave way beneath him. He was 32 years old. The day the uniformed officers knocked on my apartment door, my world ended. I was 5 months pregnant with Callum. I collapsed on the floor, the sound tearing out of my throat something guttural and unrecognizable. The officers stayed with me. They called my mother because she was my listed emergency contact. Corinne arrived an hour later. She did not hug me. She looked around my small, messy apartment, sighed, and told the officers she would handle the logistics. The funeral was massive. Thousands of firefighters from across the state lined the streets. The bagpipes played. The mayor gave a speech. Alistair and Blythe were inconsolable, clinging to each other in the front row. I sat between them, hollowed out, staring at the flag-draped casket. My family sat in the second row. Sloane wore a dramatic black fascinator with a veil, crying loudly whenever a camera panned in our direction. The nightmare did not end with the burial. 2 days later, while I was sitting in my dark living room, numb and staring at the wall, my phone buzzed. It was a screenshot from a friend. Tegan, my younger cousin and Sloane's most loyal follower, had posted a long status on Facebook. "So tragic about the fire," she wrote. "But honestly, it is so awkward watching Delaney play the grieving widow when they were not even married yet. She does not have any legal rights or status. It is sad, but she should not act like she was his wife. Prayers for his real family." Sloane had commented a heart emoji on the post. I threw the phone across the room. I was carrying his child. I had his ring on my finger. But in their eyes, I was just a tragic side character they could gossip about. A week later, Corinne came over. I was heavily medicated, barely sleeping, trying to figure out how I was going to raise a fatherless child on a single income. She brought a stack of paperwork and a polite, businesslike smile. "Delaney, dear, we need to talk about the finances," she said, sitting at my kitchen table and folding her hands. "I cannot look at numbers right now, Mom," I whispered, my head throbbing. "You have to," she insisted softly. I spoke with the fire department liaisons and our family attorney. "I am so sorry to tell you this, but because you and Declan were not legally married, you do not qualify for his pension. You do not qualify for the survivor benefits." I looked up, confused through the fog of grief and medication. "But the baby? The baby is not born yet. The bureaucracy is incredibly strict." The union representative said that since there is no marriage certificate, the funds default back to the city or his parents, and his parents are dealing with their own debts. "There is nothing coming to you." I felt a cold panic rise in my chest. "Nothing? How am I going to pay rent?" "The baby needs." Corinne reached out and patted my hand, a gesture so rare it made me freeze. "Do not worry. Your father and I will help you with a small monthly stipend until you get back on your feet. But you must sign these proxy forms so I can handle the hospital bills and the estate closure on your behalf. You are too emotional to deal with the red tape." I trusted her. I was shattered, exhausted, and terrified of the future. I signed the papers. I let her take control. For 7 years, I struggled. I went back to work when Callum was 6 weeks old. I clipped coupons. I took extra consulting gigs late at night. Every time things got tight, Corinne would send a couple of $100, always accompanied by a lecture about my unfortunate situation. I believed her lie. I believed the city had turned its back on my son. I believed Declan had died without being able to leave us anything. I believed it until a Thursday evening, 21 months ago. I was sitting at a mandatory family dinner. My mother was 3 glasses of Pinot Noir deep, holding court at the head of the table. She was bragging about Sloane's recent gala event. "It was just spectacular," Corinne slurred slightly, waving her wine glass. "And I am so glad we could help underwrite the PR fund." Giving Sloane that $45,000 boost really put her on the map. And the best part? We did not even have to touch the retirement accounts. I was cutting a piece of chicken. My knife stopped against the porcelain plate. $45,000. My parents were wealthy, but their wealth was tied up in real estate and strict trusts. They lived on a fixed, comfortable income. $45,000 in liquid cash, handed over without touching retirement or savings. That math did not work. I looked at my mother. She was laughing at something Sloane said. "I am a forensic accountant. I track hidden money for a living." And in that moment, sitting at that dining table, looking at the woman who had watched me struggle to buy diapers for 7 years, a horrifying, sickening thought planted itself in my brain. Where did she get the money? I did not say anything. I finished my dinner. I hugged them goodbye. I went home, put Callum to bed, and opened my laptop. I did not know what I was looking for, but I knew I was going to find it. And when I did, the fragile peace I had maintained with my family would burn faster than the building that took my husband. The morning after that dinner, I walked into my office at the logistics firm. My mind was buzzing with the faint, persistent hum of suspicion. It is a specific feeling in my profession, the itch right behind your eyes when the numbers on a page do not tell the same story as the person speaking. I sat at my desk, pulling up the public tax filings for Sloan's nonprofit PR firm. Nonprofits are required to file a Form 990, which is public record. I downloaded the last 7 years of her filings. I spent 4 hours cross-referencing her listed donations against her operational costs. Sloan's firm was a black hole. Huge sums of money were classified under vague terms like community outreach and consulting retainers. But what caught my eye was a massive influx of capital recorded 6 years ago. A single, anonymous donation of $250,000. $250,000. My breath hitched. That was not a small family loan. That was life-changing money. I closed the spreadsheet, my hands trembling. I needed to know where that money came from. Fate, or perhaps the universe's twisted sense of justice, handed me the key 2 weeks later. Our firm was hired to conduct a massive, comprehensive compliance audit for a regional bank. We were checking their internal protocols for trust account disbursements. The name of the bank was Liberty Regional. It was the exact same bank my mother had used for 40 years. The Wellesley branch. As the lead auditor, I had authorized secure access to their archived transaction databases to pull random sample sets. It was highly unethical to search for a personal name without cause. If I was caught, I could lose my license. But the phantom image of that $250,000 entry on Sloan's tax return was screaming at me. At 11 p.m. on a Friday, when the office was completely empty, I typed my mother's name into the bank's secure server. Corinne Andrews. Dozens of accounts popped up. Checking, savings, joint accounts with my father. I scrolled past them. Then, at the very bottom of the screen, listed under closed and archived accounts, was a trust. The title of the account made my heart stop beating. The Callum Whitaker Memorial Beneficiary Trust. Trustee, Corinne Andrews. I clicked on the account history. The screen loaded. 7 years ago, exactly 3 months after Declan's funeral, a check was deposited into this account. The origin of the check was the Boston Firefighters Memorial Fund. The amount was exactly $250,000. It was the money the union had raised. It was the public donations, the passing of the hat at firehouses across the state, the memorial grants. It was money meant to secure the future of the children left behind by fallen heroes. It was Callum's money. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The transactions rolled out beneath the deposit like a confession written in digital ink. 3 days after the money cleared, there was a wire transfer of $45,000 to Sloan's PR firm. A month later, a withdrawal of $10,000. The memo line read, Sloan, wedding dress. Over the next 6 years, the account was bled dry. Vacations to Aspen. Catering for Sloan's parties. Luxury car leases. By the time Callum turned 7, the account had a balance of 0. It was closed. They had stolen my son's future to fund my sister's vanity. I printed every single page. The printer whirred loudly in the empty office, each sheet of paper feeling heavier than the last. I packed them into a locked briefcase. I drove home in a daze. When I walked into my apartment, the babysitter was asleep on the couch. I paid her, locked the door, and walked into Callum's room. He was sleeping soundly, clutching a small, stuffed Dalmatian that Alistair had given him when he was a toddler. Above his bed, hanging on a special hook, was Declan's old, battered turnout coat. It still smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. Callum touched it every night before he went to sleep. I stood in the doorway, watching my son breathe. I thought about the times I had to say no to him. No, we cannot afford baseball camp this year. No, we cannot go on a vacation. No, we have to wait until next paycheck to buy those new shoes. And all that time, my mother was writing checks from his memorial fund to buy Sloan designer bags. The betrayal was so profound it bypassed sadness entirely and mutated into a cold, terrifying clarity. This was not just family dysfunction. This was a felony. This was wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Because in order to open that trust in my name, my mother would have had to forge my signature. I walked back into my living room, sat on the floor, and opened the briefcase. I laid the bank statements out on the rug. I looked at the numbers. I could have called the police right then. I could have handed the file to the district attorney and let them arrest her. But that was too quick. If she went to jail quietly, Sloane would spin a narrative. She would go on social media, cry about our mother's mental health crisis, play the victim, and distance herself from the crime. She would keep the money she washed through her charity and gain sympathy followers. No, jail was the finale. I wanted the destruction to be public. I wanted to burn their social standing to ash. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the humiliation they had subjected me to for 34 years. To do that, I needed more than just bank statements. I needed an ironclad case. I needed witnesses. I needed the fire department. And most importantly, I needed the signature cards from the bank. For the next 21 months, I lived a double life. I went to Sunday dinners at my parents' house. I smiled at Sloane's passive-aggressive comments. I ate the dry turkey. I let them think I was still the weak, invisible sister they could walk all over. And every night, when the doors were locked and Callum was asleep, I built the file. I started tracking the flow of the money through Sloane's charity. It was incredibly sloppy. Sloane thought she was a genius, but she had used her personal email for business transactions. I found out through a mutual contact that she kept her primary accounting records not in a secure server, but on a physical hard drive in her home office. I needed allies. I could not do this alone. I needed the people who actually loved Declan to know what had been done in his name. My first stop was to see the ghosts I had left behind in the suburbs. The people Corinne had told me wanted nothing to do with us. It was time to wake up the grandparents. I drove to the south side of the city on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The neighborhood was working class, lined with modest houses and auto repair shops. I pulled up to a small, faded diner where I knew Alistair usually ate his lunch. I had not seen Declan's parents in almost 8 years. After the funeral, Corinne told me they blamed me for the stress that caused Declan to take extra shifts. She said they wanted space. She told them that I was too traumatized and wanted to cut ties with the past. She built a wall of lies between us while we were all too deep in grief to climb over it. I walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed. Alistair was sitting in a corner booth, wearing a worn flannel shirt, reading a newspaper. His hair had gone completely white. I walked over and stood by the table. He looked up. It took him 3 seconds to recognize me. When he did, the newspaper slipped from his hands, knocking over a salt shaker. "Delaney," he whispered, his voice cracking. I slid into the booth across from him. I did not offer pleasantries. I just slid a photograph of Callum across the table. He is 9 now. He looks exactly like him, Alistair. Alistair stared at the photo. His large, calloused hands reached out, hovering over the picture before gently touching the glossy surface. A tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "We thought. Your mother said you moved. She said you did not want us confusing the boy. We did not want to cause you pain." "She lied," I said, my voice tight. "She lied to all of us." An hour later, I was sitting in the small living room of their house. Blythe had cried for 20 minutes, holding my hands so tightly my knuckles turned white. They poured me tea, and we sat in the quiet space that still felt like Declan. Then, Alistair stood up, walked into the bedroom, and came back holding a battered Nike shoebox. He set it on the coffee table and took off the lid. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, kindergarten graduation cards. Every single one was addressed to Callum. Every single one had been returned to sender. I picked one up. Across the front, written in bold red ink, were the words, "Return to sender. Do not contact." I stared at the handwriting. The sharp, angular loops of the letters. It was Corinne's handwriting. She had been intercepting their mail for years. "I kept sending them," Alistair said softly, sitting heavily in his armchair. "I thought maybe one day, when he was older, he would see them and know we never forgot him." I put the letter back in the box. "Alistair. Blythe. I am going to destroy her. I am going to take everything she has, and I need you to be there when I do it." I told them about the money. I told them about the bank statements. Blythe put her hand over her mouth, muffling a sob, while Alistair's face hardened into stone. The grief was gone, replaced by the fierce, protective anger of a father whose son's legacy had been defiled. My next stop was Engine Company 42. Walking into that firehouse was like walking into a time machine. The smell of diesel, the gleaming red trucks, the sound of the dispatch radio. I asked to see Evander. He had been Declan's best friend and second in command. He was a lieutenant now. When Evander saw me, he wrapped me in a massive bear hug, lifting me off the ground. We went to his small office in the back. I explained why I was there. I showed him the bank statements. Evander did not yell. He just stared at the papers, his jaw ticking. Then he stood up, locked the office door, and walked over to a metal filing cabinet. Declan was a lot of things, Delaney, Evander said, pulling out a heavy manila envelope. But he was not naive. He knew your family looked down on him. He knew your mother hated that you chose him. A week before the warehouse fire, we were sitting on the bumper of the truck, and he said to me, "If anything ever happens to me, do not let that woman near my kid's future." Evander slid the envelope across the desk. He drafted a handwritten will. He got it notarized by the station captain. He bypassed the city bureaucracy. He explicitly named you as the sole beneficiary of his private life insurance policy, and he specifically named your mother as someone who was legally barred from acting as a financial proxy for Callum. He asked me to hold it here, just in case. I opened the envelope. There it was. Declan's messy, familiar handwriting. A legal document that proved Corinne's proxy paperwork was completely fraudulent. This was the silver bullet. "Evander," I said, looking up at him. "Can you get the commissioner on the phone?" "For this," Evander said grimly. "I will get the commissioner, the union rep, and the chaplain." The final piece of the puzzle was legal. I needed someone ruthless. I did not hire a family lawyer. I hired Dashiell, a high-powered corporate litigator who specialized in asset recovery and fraud prosecution. Dashiell was a shark in a $5,000 suit. He did not care about family feelings. He cared about maximizing damages. I sat in his glass-walled office overlooking the harbor and laid out the bank statements, the forged letters, and Declan's hidden will. Dashiell reviewed the files in silence for 30 minutes. When he finished, he took off his glasses and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Your mother forged a federal banking document to intercept $250,000 in memorial funds," Dashiell said, tapping a silver pen on the desk. "And your sister received the stolen funds across state lines to fund a business enterprise. That is conspiracy. That is wire fraud. That is tax evasion. I do not just want them in jail," I said, leaning forward. "I want them publicly ruined. I want every friend, every donor, every person they have ever lied to watch them burn." Dashiell nodded slowly. "We will freeze their accounts on a Monday. But before we file the injunction, you can have your stage. You gather the audience. I will bring the hammer." The trap was fully set. The files were locked. The allies were waiting in the shadows. I just needed the right moment to pull the trigger. And then, Sloane sent the invitation for her baby shower. She wanted a family collage. She asked for a picture of Callum. She handed me the match. All I had to do was strike it. Thank you for watching this far. Please leave a comment with "I'm Win." This is the special symbol of true fans who have patiently followed this story. I will like and reply to all comments containing the keyword "I'm Win." See you again in the shocking plot twist that follows. We drove back to my small apartment in silence. The rain had started to fall, washing the streets of Boston in a cold, gray light. Callum sat in the passenger seat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He did not ask for the radio. He did not ask to stop for ice cream. He just watched the windshield wipers sweep back and forth. When we got inside, he took off his shoes and placed them neatly by the door. He walked into his bedroom, and I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, trying to remember how to breathe. The image of that neon tag was burned into the back of my eyelids. Unwanted. They had printed it. They had adhered it. They had displayed it. A few minutes later, Callum walked out of his room. He was holding something in his hand. He walked up to the kitchen counter and placed it gently on the granite surface. It was the neon tag. My breath caught in my throat. "Callum, why do you have that?" I took it when I walked up to the table, he said quietly, looking at the floor. I did not want them to use it on anyone else. It is a bad word, Mom. I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of tears. I pulled him into a fierce hug, pressing my face into his hair. You are not unwanted, baby. You are the most wanted, most loved boy in the entire world. Do you hear me? Your dad loved you before you were even born. And I love you more than life. I know, he mumbled into my shoulder. I am okay. Can I go read my book now? Yes, honey. Go read. I watched him walk back to his room. Then, I looked down at the neon tag on the counter. The bright pink color made my stomach churn. I reached out and picked it up. The cardstock was thick, heavy, expensive. It was the kind of stationery Sloane used for her charity galas. Out of pure, exhausted habit, I flipped the card over. My heart completely stopped. Sloane was arrogant. She was narcissistic. But she was also incredibly, stunningly careless. She had not bought new cardstock for her little prank. She had grabbed a piece of scrap paper from her home office printer, printed the neon insult on the blank side, and cut it to size. The back of the tag was a printed portion of a digital bank receipt. It was cut off, but the details were unmistakable. The logo for Liberty Regional Bank was at the top left. The date was from 3 weeks ago. And the transaction details clearly showed a wire transfer of $12,000 from the Corinne Andrews trust account directly into the operating account of Sloane's non-profit PR firm. She had brought the murder weapon to the crime scene and handed it to the victim. I traced the printed numbers with my trembling finger. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I had the bank statements, I had the forged letters, I had Declan's will, and now I had physical proof that Sloane was actively and currently receiving the stolen funds. She could never claim ignorance. She was a willing accomplice. My phone vibrated on the counter, making me jump. The caller ID flashed a name I had not expected to see. Mercer. Sloane's husband. Mercer was a wealthy, detached corporate real estate developer. He usually treated me like a piece of furniture, politely ignoring me unless he needed to move past me to get a drink. We had not spoken one-on-one in 5 years. I answered it. Hello. Delaney. Mercer's voice was low, clipped, and completely devoid of emotion. Are you alone? Yes. Why? I know what you do for a living, Mercer said smoothly. And I know what my wife has been doing with your mother. I am not an idiot. I have seen the discrepancies in her firm's accounts for months. I know the money is coming from a trust that is supposed to belong to your kid. I gripped the edge of the counter. If you know, why are you calling me? Because I am filing for divorce on Tuesday, he replied, his tone as casual as if he were ordering a coffee. Sloane is a liability. She is sloppy, she is arrogant, and she is about to be investigated for federal wire fraud. I have spent 10 years building my asset portfolio, and I am not going to let the FBI freeze my accounts because my wife decided to embezzle money from a dead firefighter. I stood completely still. What do you want, Mercer? A trade, he said. I am leaving the house tonight. But before I go, I will leave the physical hard drive from her home office in a locker at South Station. It contains every unencrypted email, every fake invoice, and every direct message between her and your mother coordinating the fund transfers. I give you the nail in her coffin. In exchange, when your attack dog lawyer files the injunction next week, my name and my corporate entities are completely shielded from the crossfire. The enemy of my enemy was not my friend, but he was an incredibly useful tool. Email my lawyer, Dashiell, I said coldly. He will draft a limited immunity agreement regarding your assets. Once it is signed, you give me the locker combination. Pleasure doing business with you, Delaney. And for what it is worth, that stunt she pulled today with the kid? It was disgusting even for her. The line went dead. I set the phone down. The adrenaline in my veins was cold and electric. The timeline had just accelerated. I could not wait another month to build the perfect trap. The trap was ready. The doors were closing. It was time to lock them in. I opened my laptop, pulled up my email, and created a new message. I added Corinne, Thaddeus, Sloane, and my Aunt Rowena, the only extended family member who had always watched the abuse with silent disapproval. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was 3 sentences. We need to discuss what happened today, and we need to discuss the finances of the last 9 years. Saturday evening, 6 o'clock sharp, at my apartment. I strongly suggest you bring a lawyer. I hit send. The countdown to their destruction had officially begun. The 5 days leading up to Saturday were a masterclass in psychological warfare. When you challenge toxic family members, they do not apologize. They escalate. They spin the narrative. They turn themselves into the victims before you even have a chance to state your case. By Sunday morning, Sloane had taken to Instagram. She posted a black and white photo of herself holding a cup of herbal tea, looking pensively out a window. The caption read, "It is so heartbreaking when toxic family members try to ruin your moments of joy out of pure jealousy." Yesterday was supposed to be about celebrating new life, but some people are so consumed by their own bitter past that they have to project their trauma onto everyone else. Cutting out negative energy is hard, but protecting my peace is my top priority right now. Thank you all for the love. Hashtag healing journey, hashtag boundaries, hashtag protect your peace. The post had over 800 likes within a few hours. The comments were a sickening echo chamber of validation from her wealthy friends, calling her so brave and telling her to stay strong. I took a screenshot of the post, printed it, and added it to the final binder. Then came the flying monkeys. That is what therapists call the people narcissists use to do their dirty work. In my family, the chief flying monkey was my younger cousin, Tegan. On Monday afternoon, she left me 3 consecutive voicemails. "Delaney, it is Tegan. Are you insane? You literally stormed out of Sloane's shower and made a massive scene. Aunt Corinne has been crying for 2 days. She said you sent some unhinged, threatening email demanding money. You need to apologize immediately. You are tearing this family apart over your own insecurities." I did not reply. I saved the audio files and sent them to Dashiell. On Wednesday night, my mother called. I let it ring twice before answering. I needed to hear the tone of her voice. I needed to know exactly how confident she still was. "Delaney," Corinne said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending disappointment she usually reserved for salespeople. "I am only calling to tell you that this little tantrum has gone far enough. Your sister is pregnant and under immense stress because of your behavior. I do not know what delusions you have cooked up in your head about our finances, but if you do not cancel this ridiculous meeting and issue a formal apology by Friday, you will be completely cut off. You will not be welcome at Thanksgiving. You will not be welcome at Christmas. You will be entirely excised from this family." She was offering me the exact thing I had wanted for 34 years. 6 o'clock, Mom, I said flatly. Do not be late. I hung up the phone. The rest of the week was a blur of calculated preparation. Dashiell and I went over the files until I knew every single number, every date, every forged signature by heart. We secured the hard drive from the locker at South Station. Mercer had not lied. The drive was a goldmine. It contained emails where Sloane explicitly complained about the tax implications of washing Mom's dead guy money. They had reduced Declan's sacrifice, his bravery, his blood, to dead guy money. By Saturday afternoon, I sent Callum to stay with a trusted friend from his school. I did not want him in the apartment. He had already fought his battle at the party. He had defended his father's honor flawlessly. The rest of this war was mine to fight. I moved the furniture in my living room. I pushed the soft, comfortable sofa against the wall and brought in 12 straight-backed dining chairs, arranging them in a semicircle facing a blank white wall. I set up a digital projector on a small table in the center of the room. It looked less like a living room and more like an interrogation chamber. At 5:30, Dashiell arrived. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He looked around the room, nodded in approval, and sat in the corner chair, crossing his legs and opening his laptop. At 5:45, a heavy knock echoed through the hallway. I opened the door. It was Alistair and Lieutenant Evander. Alistair was wearing a dark suit that looked a decade old but was meticulously pressed. Evander was in his Class A dress uniform. The dark navy wool, the shining silver buttons, the white gloves tucked into his belt. The sheer authority radiating from him changed the air pressure in the room. "Where do you want us, Delaney?" Evander asked, his voice a low rumble. "In the kitchen," I said softly. "Wait until I call you." They nodded and stepped back into the shadows of the adjacent room. At exactly 6 o'clock, the buzzer to my apartment rang. I pressed the intercom button to unlock the lobby door, my heart steady and cold. I walked over to the front door and opened it. Corinne walked in first. She was wearing a tailored beige cashmere coat and carrying a designer handbag that I knew for a fact was purchased on August 12th, 3 years ago, using $2,500 from the memorial fund. She walked into my apartment with her chin held high, the absolute picture of offended royalty. Thaddeus followed behind her, looking down at his shoes, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Next came Sloane. She walked in holding her pregnant belly, looking around my modest apartment with undisguised distaste. She was followed by Mercer, who wore a blank expression, refusing to make eye contact with me. Finally, my Aunt Rowena stepped through the door. She looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly with both hands. "Well," Corinne said, stopping in the middle of the room and looking at the semicircle of chairs. "This is incredibly dramatic, Delaney. I hope you realize how ridiculous you are making yourself look. Let's get this over with. I have dinner reservations at 8. "Have a seat, Corinne," I said, pointing to the chairs in the center. I did not call her mom. She narrowed her eyes at my tone but sat down, crossing her legs perfectly. Sloane sat next to her, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. Thaddeus took a seat on the edge, looking as though he wanted to sink into the floor. Mercer sat far away from Sloane, pulling out his phone. Rowena took a seat in the back. Corinne finally noticed Dashiell sitting in the corner. "Who is this?" she demanded. "My name is Dashiell Vance," he said smoothly, not looking up from his screen. "I am the senior litigation partner at Vance, Sterling, and Hayes. I represent Delaney and the estate of Declan Whitaker." Corinne scoffed, waving her hand. "Estate? What estate?" "The man died with a lease truck and credit card debt. Delaney, if this is some pathetic attempt to extort money from us because you are jealous of your sister, it is not going to work. We brought our family attorney's card. You can speak to him on Monday." "I will not be speaking to your family attorney on Monday," I said, walking to the center of the room and picking up the remote for the projector. "Because by Monday morning, he will be advising you to plead guilty to federal charges." I pressed the button. The projector hummed to life, casting a bright rectangular glow against the white wall. "I am a forensic auditor, Corinne," I said, my voice eerily calm. "For 9 years, I thought you were just a terrible mother. It turns out, you are an incredibly sloppy criminal." The room went dead silent. The show was about to begin. The first slide appeared on the wall. It was a massive, high-resolution scan of a signature card from Liberty Regional Bank, dated August of the year Declan died. Next to it, for comparison, was a scan of my actual driver's license signature. "This," I said, pointing the laser pointer at the screen, "is the foundational document for the Callum Whitaker Memorial Beneficiary Trust. Opened with a deposit of $250,000 from the Boston Firefighters Memorial Fund. The signature on the left is mine. The signature on the right, authorizing you, Corinne, as the sole trustee, is a forgery." Corinne's face did not pale immediately. Her defense mechanisms were too deeply ingrained. She let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "This is absurd. You were on heavy medication, Delaney. You signed dozens of papers. You simply do not remember." "I do not remember," I agreed, clicking to the next slide. "But Dr. Eris Thorne remembers. He is a board-certified forensic document examiner. His 70-page report, which Dashiell will be submitting to the district attorney, concludes with 100% certainty that the signature was forged. Specifically, he noted the 90-degree slant and the heavy pen pressure on the loop of the D. The exact same pressure and slant found in your handwriting, Corinne." Sloane shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Mom, what is she talking about?" "She is lying," Corinne snapped, her voice rising an octave. "She fabricated this." "Let's look at the fabrications then," I said, clicking the remote again. The screen changed to a meticulously organized spreadsheet. The numbers were highlighted in red and green. Between October of year 1 and March of year 4, I read aloud, there were 47 separate wire transfers from the Memorial Fund to the operating account of Sloane's non-profit PR firm. The total amount transferred was $180,000. Sloane, your charity did not have anonymous donors. It had a dead firefighter funding your cocktail parties. Sloane's mouth fell open. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She turned to our mother, panic flashing in her eyes. Mom, you said that money was from your private investments. You told me it was an early inheritance. Oh, stop playing the victim, Sloane, I said coldly. I clicked the remote. A screenshot of an email appeared on the wall. It was sent from Sloane's personal email address to Corinne's. I read the text out loud, making sure every syllable echoed in the quiet room. Mom, my accountant is asking questions about the massive influx of cash. We need to classify the memorial money as a consulting retainer so we do not get hit with a tax audit. Make sure the next transfer is under $10,000 so it does not trigger a federal flag. I lowered the remote and looked directly into my sister's terrified eyes. You knew. You knew exactly where the money was coming from, and you helped her launder it. That is federal conspiracy, Sloane. The maximum sentence is 20 years. Sloane let out a strangled gasp, grabbing her stomach. I am pregnant. You cannot do this to me. Mercer, do something. Say something. She turned to her husband. Mercer did not look up from his phone. He casually adjusted his cuffs and said, I have nothing to say, Sloane. I am filing for divorce on Tuesday. My lawyers have already reviewed the files. Good luck. Sloane let out a loud, high-pitched scream, burying her face in her hands. Corinne stood up. Her hands were shaking violently, the composure finally shattering. You ungrateful little wretch, she hissed, her face contorted with rage. We took care of you. We put a roof over your head. That money belonged to the family, and I distributed it as I saw fit. Your husband was a reckless idiot who got himself killed, and I made sure his payout actually did something useful instead of being wasted on your mediocre life. The silence that followed her outburst was heavy and suffocating. She had finally said it out loud. She had admitted the theft, the resentment, the absolute lack of remorse. Aunt Rowena stood up slowly from the back row. She looked at her sister with an expression of pure disgust. Corinne, you stole from a grieving widow. You stole from a child. You are a monster. Rowena turned, grabbed her coat, and walked toward the door. She stopped next to me, put a trembling hand on my shoulder, and whispered, I am so sorry I never protected you, Delaney. Burn them to the ground. Rowena walked out, slamming the door behind her. Corinne looked frantically at my father. Thaddeus, tell her to stop this. Tell this lawyer to get out of our house. Thaddeus looked up. His eyes were red. He looked older than I had ever seen him. It is her house, Corinne, he whispered. Dad, I said softly, drawing his attention. There is one more slide. I clicked the remote. It was a document from 3 years ago. A withdrawal slip for a separate, small savings account that Alistair and Blythe had set up for Callum when he was born. It only had $5,000 in it. But the slip showed a total withdrawal, closing the account. And at the bottom of the slip, next to Corinne's signature, was another signature authorizing the release of funds. It was Thaddeus's signature. My father stared at the screen, his face crumbling. You knew, I said, my voice finally cracking under the weight of the betrayal. You let her steal the $250,000, and then you personally signed off on letting her steal the last $5,000 my son had to his name. Why, Dad? Why? Thaddeus buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. She said we needed it to cover the property taxes. She said you would not mind. I did not want to fight with her, Delaney. I am so sorry. I was just so tired of fighting with her. He traded my son's future for a quiet evening in his living room. I am done with you, I said to him, the last thread of my childhood attachment snapping completely. I am done with all of you. Corinne crossed her arms, trying to rebuild her shattered armor. Fine. You want the money back? We will sell the vacation house. We will pay you back with interest. You do not have to drag the police into this. We are still family. We were never a family, I said. And this is not a negotiation. I did not bring you here to settle. I brought you here to show you exactly what is waiting for you on Monday morning. Suddenly, a heavy, authoritative knock echoed from the kitchen door. The door I had told Evander to wait behind. I looked at Corinne, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. And I brought you here to face the people you actually stole from. I walked over to the kitchen door and pulled it open. Alistair walked out first. His face was a mask of cold, hardened grief. Following right behind him was Lieutenant Evander, towering in his dress uniform, the medals on his chest gleaming in the projector light. And then, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway behind them, came a third man. I had asked Evander to bring the Union rep. I did not know he had brought the man who commanded the entire force. Fire Commissioner Gannon. He was in his full Class A dress uniform, a black mourning band still pinned over his badge in permanent memory of the fallen. His presence was overwhelming. He did not walk into the room. He occupied it. When Corinne saw the uniforms, the last remaining color drained from her face. She stumbled backward, the back of her knees hitting her chair, and she collapsed into it. Sloane stopped crying and stared, her mouth hanging open. Commissioner Gannon did not look at my sister. He did not look at my father. He walked straight toward my mother, stopping just 2 feet in front of her chair. He looked down at her with a level of contempt that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. Mrs. Andrews, Gannon's voice was deep, resonant, and commanded absolute silence. My name is Commissioner Gannon. I command the men and women of the Boston Fire Department. 7 years ago, I stood on a podium and folded an American flag, and I handed it to this young woman because the man she loved burned to death trying to save 4 terrified teenagers. Corinne tried to speak, her lips moving, but no sound came out. Gannon leaned in slightly. That money you took? It did not come from the government. It came from the pockets of men and women who work 90-hour weeks dragging people out of hell. It came from bake sales. It came from booths passed around at intersections in the freezing rain. We bled for that money. We raised it to make sure that the son of our brother would never have to worry about a roof over his head or a book for his school. He pointed a thick, gloved finger at the projector screen, which was still displaying the forged bank document. You did not just steal from a bank, Gannon growled, his voice rising in volume until it vibrated in the walls. You stole from Engine 42. You stole from the memory of a man whose boots you are not fit to shine. I am told you announced at a party that some shame is earned. Well, Mrs. Andrews, you are absolutely right. Alistair stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the commissioner. He looked down at Corinne, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You returned my letters, Alistair said, his voice raw with pain. You returned 50 letters I wrote to my grandson, telling him I loved him. You told me Delaney hated us. You told Delaney we abandoned her. You built a wall of lies to keep a grieving family apart just so you could raid a dead man's grave to buy dresses for your favorite daughter. Alistair turned to Thaddeus, who was still weeping silently in his chair. And you? You are no father. You are a coward. A real man protects his daughter. He does not feed her to the wolves so he can read his newspaper in peace. Thaddeus flinched as if he had been physically struck, turning his face away in shame. Dashiell, who had been sitting quietly in the corner observing the execution, finally stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up a thick stack of legal documents, and walked over to my mother. He dropped the papers onto her lap. They hit her knees with a heavy thud. Corinne Andrews, Dashiell said, his voice crisp, professional, and devoid of any mercy. At 8 o'clock on Monday morning, my firm will file an ex parte motion in federal court freezing every single asset tied to your name, your husband's name, your daughter's name, and her corporate entities. Your bank accounts, your retirement portfolios, and the deed to your primary residence will be locked. Sloane let out another wail, gripping her hair. No, you cannot take my house. Mercer, stop them. Dashiell ignored her and kept his eyes on Corinne. Simultaneously, a comprehensive dossier of evidence, including the hard drive your son-in-law so graciously provided, will be handed over to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts. They will be pursuing charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You are looking at federal prison, Mrs. Andrews. There is no settlement. There is no plea deal that we will support. We are going to ensure that you are prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law. Corinne looked down at the stack of papers in her lap. Her hands hovered over them, shaking uncontrollably. The illusion of control, the elegant facade she had maintained for 6 decades, completely shattered. She slid out of the chair and fell to her knees on my hardwood floor. "Delaney," Corinne sobbed, looking up at me, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, ruining her mascara. "Please. I am your mother. I am your mother. Do not do this to me. I will give you everything. I will transfer the house to you. Please do not send me to prison. I am an old woman." I looked down at her. I thought about the days after the fire when I was completely alone, struggling to feed my baby. I thought about the 7 years of poverty, of anxiety, of being treated like a burden. I thought about the neon tag with the word "Unwanted" sitting on my kitchen counter. "You stopped being my mother the day you stole my son's future," I said, my voice completely steady. "And you're not crying because you're sorry. You're crying because you got caught." I looked at Dashiell and nodded. "Get out of my house," I said to the family sitting in the circle. "All of you. We will see you in court." The exodus from my apartment was pathetic. Mercer was the first to leave. He stood up, adjusted his tie, walked past his sobbing pregnant wife without looking at her, and walked out the door. He had secured his own immunity. He did not care about the rest of the burning ship. Thaddeus stood up next. He did not offer his hand to help Corinne off the floor. He looked at me one last time, opened his mouth as if he wanted to apologize again, but no words came out. He turned and shuffled out the door, a broken, empty shell of a man. Sloane struggled to her feet. She was hyperventilating, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black lines. She looked at the projector screen, then at the fire commissioner, and finally at me. "You ruined my life," she hissed, her voice trembling with venom. "I hate you. I will always hate you." "The feeling is completely mutual, Sloane," I replied. "Close the door on your way out." Corinne was the last to leave. She gathered the legal papers from the floor, clutching them to her chest like a shield. She did not look at me. She did not look at the uniforms in the room. She walked out of the apartment with her head bowed, the weight of her impending destruction finally breaking her spine. When the door clicked shut, the heavy silence returned to the room. But this time, it was not suffocating. It felt like a fever breaking. It felt like the first deep breath of clean air after 9 years of holding my breath underwater. Evander walked over to the projector, reached down, and pulled the plug. The white wall went dark. "You did good, Delaney," Evander said softly, putting a massive hand on my shoulder. "Declan would be incredibly proud of you. You protected the boy." Alistair walked over and pulled me into a tight embrace. He smelled like tobacco and rain, a smell that instantly reminded me of the good years. "We are never letting you go again," Alistair whispered into my hair. "You and Callum are our family. We are going to make up for all the lost time. Sunday dinners. Every single week." "I would love that, Alistair," I said, wiping a tear from my eye. Commissioner Gannon cleared his throat. He had been standing quietly by the door, observing the emotional reunion. "Ms. Andrews," he said, stepping forward. "Before I leave, I have something I need to do." "Is your son here?" "He is at a friend's house," I said. I did not want him to see all of this. Gannon nodded in understanding. "When you bring him home, give him this for me." The commissioner reached into his heavy coat pocket and pulled out a small, polished wooden box. He handed it to me. I opened the brass latch and lifted the lid. Resting on a bed of dark blue velvet was a solid gold fire department badge. It was a smaller, custom-cast version of a captain's shield. Engraved in the center, right below the number 42, was the name, Callum Whitaker, Honorary Captain. "Tell that boy," Gannon said, his eyes shining with unshed emotion, "that he has 4,000 uncles and aunts in this city. Tell him that when he stood up in front of those people and spoke his father's name, he honored the entire department. He is one of us. Whenever he wants to ride in a truck, he just has to say the word." "Thank you, Commissioner," I whispered, my voice breaking completely. Thank you. Gannon saluted me, a crisp, perfect military salute, before turning and walking out the door. 2 days later, at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, Dashiell filed the paperwork. The federal judge granted the ex parte injunction without hesitation. The FBI raided Sloan's nonprofit office by noon, carrying out boxes of hard drives and paper files. The social fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Sloan's wealthy friends, the ones who had liked her Instagram post about protecting her peace, abandoned her overnight. You can survive a lot of scandals in high society, but stealing money from the orphan child of a dead firefighter is unforgivable. Her charity was dissolved. Mercer followed through on his threat and filed for divorce, evicting her from the penthouse. Corinne and Thaddeus were forced to put their massive estate on the market to pay for a team of federal defense attorneys. Thaddeus moved into a small rental apartment in the suburbs, refusing to speak to Corinne. As for Corinne, her trial is scheduled for next spring. She is currently out on bail, living in a cheap motel, completely isolated. Aunt Rowena called her once, just to tell her she was writing her out of the family trust, and then blocked her number. The money they stole is slowly being recovered through asset forfeiture. It will take time, but Dashiell assured me that every single dollar will be returned to the trust, with interest, before Callum turns 18. But the money is not what matters most. What matters is what happened a month after that Saturday night. I stood in a courtroom in Suffolk County. The judge, a kind-faced woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked down at the paperwork on her desk. She looked at me, and then she looked at Callum, who was sitting next to me wearing a tiny, perfectly pressed suit. "Is this what you want, young man?" the judge asked, peering over her glasses. Callum sat up straight, his hands resting on the table. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to have my dad's last name. It belongs to me." The judge smiled warmly and stamped the document with a loud thud. I walked out of that courthouse holding the hand of Callum Whitaker. We went straight to the cemetery. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. We walked up the rolling green hill to the section reserved for the fire department. We stopped in front of the polished granite headstone that bore the name Captain Declan Whitaker. Callum knelt down in the grass. He pulled the gold honorary badge out of his pocket and placed it gently on top of the headstone. "I got our name back, Dad," Callum whispered to the stone. "Mom fought them all, and we won. We got it back." I stood behind him, the warm wind blowing through my hair, feeling a profound sense of peace. The shadows of my past, the voices that told me I was invisible, the people who tried to make my son feel unwanted, they were gone. Burned to ash by the very truth they had tried to bury. There is a myth that strength means endurance. That being the strong one in a toxic family means you can absorb the abuse, keep the peace, and never make a scene. I believed that myth for 34 years. I know better now. True strength is not how much weight you can carry in silence. True strength is knowing exactly when to drop that weight on the feet of the people who forced you to carry it. If you are listening to this, and you are the scapegoat of your family, if you are the one who is constantly told that you are overreacting, that you need to be the bigger person, that you should forgive the unforgivable just because you share blood, I want you to know that you do not owe them your silence. You do not owe them your peace. Some shame is earned, and it is not your job to shield them from the consequences of their own actions. Hold on to your truth. Build your evidence. Find your allies. And when the time is right, do not just walk away. Burn the bridges, and let the fire light your way forward. Are you currently dealing with a toxic family member who refuses to take accountability for their actions? What was the moment you realized you had to stop keeping the peace and start fighting back? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and standing your ground.